message, I suppose. Anyways, so today we're going to be reading Icarus and Daedalus, or I don't know how to, it's, Daedalus, what the frick? I always read this Daedalus. Daedalus, okay. Dead, what the heck? Why? Why? Okay. So, I'm doing whispering because I prefer whispering in ASMR videos. I don't know if you guys like soft speaking better or what. Okay. Anyways, so this is kind of like a weird angle, but yeah. Because it's actually Greek. Okay, so I'm just gonna say Daedalus, okay? Yeah. Because that's how it's pronounced in the Percy Jackson books when, it's an audiobook. When I listen to them as audiobooks, it's pronounced Daedalus. So, that's how we're gonna do it today. Anyway, so this is the story of Icarus and Daedalus. Yep. That happened. Icarus and Daedalus. Oh my gosh. So, we are going to be reading from, oh shoot, I'm so sorry. Heck. Okay, so we're going to be reading from Classics Myths to read aloud. I got this at Goodwill, and I'm super excited to read this, because I love myths. Whispering's actually really bad for your voice. So we'll see how this goes. And I may do some eating sounds if you guys want me to. You guys, my one viewer that's watching right now. Okay, so anyways, the reason I'm doing live broadcasts instead of videos is because I don't have the space on my phone for videos. So I'm just doing live streams and posting those, and just hoping it works out. Anyways, so let's start out with the intro to this. Daedalus was considered by the Greeks the most talented of all their artists, craftsmen, architects, and inventors. It was said that he had been taught by the goddess Athena, but however he came by his skill, it was certain that no other artisan could surpass his work. It was Daedalus who was called upon to build the great labyrinth in Crete. But today he is known primarily as the man who discovered the secrets of flight. His name lives on in Greek adjective Daidalos, which means cunningly made or skillfully worked. So, throughout all of Greece, Daedalus was known as the most skillful of men, a master craftsman, artist, architect, and inventor. Indeed, his fame had spread to the island of Crete, where King Minos had pleaded for Daedalus to build him a cage for a prison that could hold the terrible monster called the Minotaur. This hideous beast devoured men, children, and women at his pleasure, and none in all the land could destroy or even control him. Daedalus accepted this challenge and built for the king a large, fantastic maze he called the Labyrinth, whose winding passageways were so cunningly tangled up and twisted around that once inside you could never find your way out again. And so the Minotaur was trapped within this ingenious device, and Daedalus was praised as a genius and given great honors by the king. But King Minos, after all, was a tyrant, and quick to anger at the slightest offense and cruel in his punishment of anyone who opposed him. And before long, Daedalus fell out of the king's favor to such an extent that Daedalus was imprisoned with his young son Icarus in a high tower. Although the two managed to escape from their cells, they could find no way to leave the island because King Minos had his guards keep strict watch all along the shore, permitting no ship to sail without the most careful watch. Daedalus, however, was determined to use this skill and cunning to find some way to make his escape. At last, after watching the seagulls, who soared far out of reach of Minos and his guards, Daedalus thought of a plan by which he could win freedom for Icarus and himself. "Though King Minos may block me off by land and sea," he said, "at least the sky still lies open, and that is the way we shall go." Both father and son then set about gathering as many feathers as they could find, feathers that had been dropped by the gulls all along the shore. Daedalus then placed these feathers in a row, beginning with the smallest, with a shorter one just below each longer one, with such care and precision that you could almost believe that the feathers had once come from just such a row. Each succeeding row was fashioned in the same delicate way. The flowers secured into a framework with the thread and wax. Each framework was then given a gentle curvature. Soon it was apparent that Daedalus, the master builder, had created a pair of wings, perfectly tailored to his own dimensions. When the last of the work was done, Daedalus fastened the wings to his own shoulders, and after a few trial efforts, found that by waving his arms in a bird-like motion, he could actually climb through the air. He held himself aloft, wavering this way and that, with the wind against the wind, until at last, like a giant fledgling, he had taught himself to fly. Settling to the ground once again, he immediately began to fashion another, smaller pair of wings for Icarus, and when the task was done, he taught his son what he had learned about their use. The morning brought with it a perfect wind by which to make their escape. Daedalus called to his son as he fitted the wings to the boy's shoulders. He gave him his final instructions. "Icarus, remember always to maintain a moderate height, for if you fly too low, the fog and vapor will weigh down your feathers, and if you fly too high, the heat of the sun will surely melt them apart." The father's voice trembled, and tears glistened in his eyes as he repeated his warning, then lifted himself aloft and flew ahead. But for Icarus, his father's warning simply went in one ear and out the other, for who could remember to be careful when he was about to fly for the first time? All that remained in his mind was the joy of escape and the thrill of performing what all children had dreamed about, but none had ever before accomplished. A few sweeps of his arms, and Icarus felt his feet leave the earth. A few more, and he was soaring behind his father, looking down on the shore and the ships and the astonished guards of King Minos. The shepherds and the farmers who glimpsed them high above the treetops, stopped their work and gazed in awe of what they thought surely must be gods. Apollo, perhaps with Cupid, following close behind. At first there was a terror mixed with joy of Icarus and Daedalus, for the wide vacancy of the air dazed them, and every glance downward sent their senses reeling. But eventually they began to master this power, and they became overjoyed with the sense and freedom of flight. The ease and freedom. Icarus, though, grew more than just comfortable in the air. He grew bold. He stopped following his father and began to soar higher and higher toward the sky. He forgot everything that Daedalus had told him about staying on a middle course and not flying too close to the sun. He thought only about wanting to see what it would be like to touch the sky and play among the stars. Poor Icarus, the nearer he flew to the blazing sun, the more its rays warmed the wax and held his feathers together. One by one they loosened and dropped away, just like so many snowflakes. Now, terrified, he fluttered his arms wildly, but there were not enough feathers left to hold him in the air. He cried out, "Father, oh father, save me, or I shall surely die." But Daedalus was now too far away to hear these plaintive cries. And so Icarus fell like a leaf tossed down the wind, down and down, calling his father's name, and all the while there would be no help, and the boy drowned in the sea below. When Daedalus saw that his son was no longer following him, he called out the boy's name in fear, but there was no reply. He sought high and low for the boy, but found only some feathers afloat on the water, and he knew that Icarus lay in a watery grave. he flew on alone, bitterly cursing the skill that had allowed him to create this tragic invention, and when at last he arrived safely on land, he built a temple to Apollo, and there hung up his wings as an offering to the god, and never again did he attempt to fly. So, don't fly too close to the sun, children. Let's see, what else should I read? Oh, this is a good one. Echo and Narcissus. So, shall we read the intro first? This is one of many tales in which we see Jupiter's Thanks. This is one of the many tales in which we see Jupiter's desire to stray occasionally away from his own home and to consort with both mortals and nymphs on earth. His wife Juno is suspicious of his philandering, and she punishes those who encourage Jupiter in his wandering ways. Your children may think that the punishment in this story is misplaced or overly severe, but harsh and seemingly unjust punishments occur quite commonly in the ancient myths, as we shall see in other stories throughout this book. In the days when the gods and goddesses watched over the earth and cared for its people, there lived some lesser gods too, more than mere mortals, but without the magic power of the gods. Such were the nymphs, those pretty young maidens who lived on earth in the mountains or forests or rivers, but who were attendants to various gods and goddesses. There was one dainty nymph named Echo, who was such a great chatterbox that she was seldom silent, and her love of talking was the cause of the sad misfortune that befell her. Echo was one of the nymphs who served in attendance, and oh my gosh, I cannot speak. Let's see if I can find some water. Normally I keep like a water bottle or something by my bed, but I can't see any. Okay, anyways. Echo was one of the nymphs who served and attended to the needs of mighty Jupiter, king of all the gods on Olympus. When Jupiter came down to earth, as he did from time to time, the nymphs who served him would keep him company. Because they were partly divine themselves, oh my lord! They understood him and could entertain him in ways that mortals simply never could. Now Jupiter was a great lover of beauty, and it was one of his favorite pleasures to talk with and be with these lovely nymphs whenever he could. But Jupiter's wife, Juno, queen of Olympus, had a very jealous nature, and it made her exceedingly angry when her husband's roving fancy caused him to wander off to seek the entertainment of the dainty nymphs and the company of certain mortal maidens. Those eyebrows, though, just don't look at me, okay? Let's not talk about that. That never happened. One day, Jupiter set off for the valleys below Olympus to talk to his nymphs. To talk to his nymphs. And to join in the merry games they loved to play. And as soon as Juno heard of this, she determined to go down into the valley herself and scold her truant husband if she found him enjoying the company of the nymphs, for she was very jealous of their youth and beauty. When she reached the entrance to the valley, however, she was met by Echo, who, guessing what the angry goddess had come for, and eager to save her lord Jupiter and her friends from any trouble, began talking to Juno, and talking, in order to give the nymphs time to escape and hide themselves. Echo held the queen in conversation for a long time, chattering like a magpie about everything that came to her mind. It was no great hardship for her to do this, since she dearly loved the sound of her own voice, and was never at a loss for something to talk about. Juno tried to find an appropriate pause in which to break away, but Echo had so many interesting things to say and talked so incessantly that it was impossible to interrupt her. So, when at last the pretty chatterbox came to a stop for sheer lack of breath, Juno seized the opportunity to rush past her. She found the valley deserted, and all the nymphs had managed to escape by this time, and Jupiter had vanished. Juno then realized how she had been tricked, and in her anger she determined to punish the dainty nymph who had detained her for so long at the entrance to the valley. With her divine powers, oh my lord, I am so sorry. With her divine powers, she caused the unfortunate Echo to lose almost entirely that one talent she possessed the most, her ability to talk. The only words that Echo would be allowed to speak hereafter would be the very last words of the very last sentences that she heard other people say. And then only in a faint, distant voice. Poor unfortunate Echo. Poor unfortunate souls. Poor unfortunate Echo. Because of her concern for her friends, she had been punished so cruelly, and her sorrow was very great. It had always been such a delight to her to talk and hear the sound of her own pretty voice. Now she could no longer chat merrily to her friends, and she had to be content merely to repeat, very faintly, the last 2 or 3 words of their sentences when they spoke to her. But her friends were very kind to her, and they would often call out a greeting to her from the hillside, just so that Echo could gladly repeat the last words and be filled with the joy at hearing the sound of her voice once more. Now it happened that in this same valley there dwelt a beautiful youth named Narcissus, who had such charm and such dazzling good looks that every maiden who saw him at once fell in love with him. But sad to say, Narcissus himself had a cold heart and was quite incapable of feeling love for anyone, human or divine. He did everything in his power to escape his admirers, since he had no desire for their attentions, and no love to give them in return. One day Narcissus was wandering through the forest with some of his friends, when he stopped to pluck a wildflower, and lost sight of his companions. He turned to take the path that he thought they had followed, and in doing him, oh my god. In doing so, he passed by a tree in which the lovely Echo had been resting. The moment she beheld his marvelous beauty, she fell deeply in love with him, and could not bear for him to be out of her sight. She followed him through the woods, longing to speak and tell him how she felt, but thanks to Juno's wrath, she no longer had the power to do so. She did not dare make her presence known for fear that he would be angry or would quickly reject her because she could not speak. And so she just watched him, following closely out of his sight. They went on this way for some time, Narcissus parting the branches in search of his friends, and Echo stealing softly behind him, until the boy suddenly realized that he was lost, and he called out, "Is anyone there? Is anyone here?" Echo, stepping out behind a tree, answered, "Here," for she could only repeat the final words of what was spoken in her presence. Well, you can imagine Narcissus's surprise, for he thought that he was quite alone in this area of the woods. He looked all around, but he couldn't see anyone to whom the voice belonged. He again cried out, "Where are you? Come here!" Whereupon Echo responded, "Here!" This was bewildering. He could see no one, and yet every cry of his was answered by a voice that seemed quite close by. He went on calling and questioning, and every time Echo answered with his last words. She did not dare to show herself, but she could not help answering, as long as she decided to take a chance, thinking that he might just be understanding and loving, and he might not be angry with her, secretly following his steps. She came out. Oh my gosh. I completely messed up that sentence. At long last, she decided to take a chance, thinking that he might just be understanding and loving, and he might not be angry with her for secretly following his steps. She came out from behind a tree and ran to meet him. She twined her dainty arms around his neck, trying to express with her actions the love that she could not put into words. Alas, Echo's hopes were rudely dashed, for Narcissus hated to have anyone show him even the slightest affection. He pushed the lovely nymph aside with a rough hand and fled at once to the deepest part of the woods. Poor Echo, his harsh glares and unkind actions had broken her heart. She hid herself in the woods and mourned and grieved, thinking of the beautiful youth whom she loved so much, but who had treated her so rudely. She wept day and night and wouldn't touch any food. Before long she grew pale and thin and began to waste away to a shadow, as people say, until the last of her body disappeared. And nothing remained but her voice, who can still be heard this day among the hills and valleys, answering every call. As for the cold-hearted Narcissus, he too came to a sad and lonely end. One of the maidens who he had so harshly scorned prayed to the gods that Narcissus be punished for tormenting people so, and that prayer was answered. It fell to the goddess Nemesis, who was the goddess of retribution and punishment, to determine his fate. May he who will not love others love only himself, she decreed. It happened that one day, after tracking some game through the forest for many hours, Narcissus came to a shady spot surrounding a clear, deep pool, from which he could quench his thirst. As he stooped down to drink from it, he was overcome with surprise and delight at the image that appeared on the smooth surface of the water. It was a face, but such a lovely face that he could not take his eyes off of it. The longer he looked, the more beautiful the face did seem, and at the length he had fallen passionately in love. Oh, and at length, what doesn't make sense? And at length he had fallen passionately in love with the image in the pool. Yes, Narcissus had fallen in love with his own reflection. He spoke to the beautiful image, and its lips parted as if they were answering him, but no sound could he hear. He smiled, and the face in the pool smiled back. When he beckoned the image to come to him, the image beckoned too. But when he tried to touch it, the lovely face became rippled and blurred and disappeared from view. Poor Narcissus, although he finally realized that it was his own face that was reflected in the pool. It was a face of such marvelous beauty that he could not tear himself away from the spot. So deep was his passion for his own fair looks, and so strong the power of his love, that he could not resist it. He lost all desire for food and for sleep, and night and day he lay upon the grass, gazing at his own image reflected in the water. And so, over time, Narcissus the beautiful, like the dainty Echo whom he had scorned, gradually wasted away, his body growing thinner and thinner until he died. When the fair youth had breathed his last, the gods, in pity for his sad fate, transformed his body into a beautiful, sweet-scented flower with a bright golden center and soft white petals, which nodded to his reflection in the pool. And to this day, that lovely flower, called the Narcissus, is found by quiet pools, gazing at its image in the water. So, there we go. And that's where we get narcissism. Let's see. Let's see. So, I am so sorry I don't hit the microphone. Oh, this is a good one. The spinning contest. Although the gods were immortal and more powerful than humans could even imagine. Although the gods were immortal and more powerful than humans could even imagine, still they had some traits that you might not think too godlike. They were, for instance, extremely jealous of their superiority over all mortals, and any mortals who were presumptuous enough to compare themselves in any way to the gods were committing the sin known as hubris. There are many tales in both the Greek and Roman myths that involve God having to teach humility to a human, and in the story that follows, often the lesson is a hard one. I gotta find some water. Just a sec. Heck, I am so sorry. Let's just put this down for a minute. Found some water. Okay. Where'd my book go? There it is. Okay. Do you guys mind if I eat something? I've got these like chip things. They're pretty good. Okay. Okay, good. So I'm gonna pronounce this the way I think it's pronounced, okay? There's like a little pronunciation guide, but I'm gonna ignore it. So, there was once an ancient city that lay across the Aegean Sea from Greece, and in that city dwelt a certain maiden, Arachne, by the name. Though her parents had been very poor, Arachne brought wealth and comfort to their little village through her great skill in weaving and embroidering. Such beautiful things did she fashion with her wool, and so graceful did she look as she worked with her spindle, that lords and ladies came from every part of the land to see her at work and to purchase the products of her loom. So, because of Arachne's skill in creating the most intricate and delicate fabrics, prosperity took the place of poverty in Arachne's home. And her parents blessed their daughter, and all of them lived very happily. Now, this cheery state could have continued had the maiden not fallen victim to her own pride and listened too earnestly to the praises that were showered upon her for her skill with the loom and the needle. Even the nymphs themselves would leave their play in the woodlands and the waters to come and look and admire as she performed at her loom. Her work was so beautiful, not only when she was finished, but also beautiful to watch in the doing, that the nymphs would often say on occasion, "Surely the goddess Athena herself must have taught you, for only she alone in all the world has more mastery and skill than you." But Arachne was so proud and so vain that she would not acknowledge her debt to anyone, even to the goddess who was the protector of all the handicrafts and household arts, and by whose grace alone anyone had skill in them. "I learned not from Athena," she replied. "Indeed, Athena could learn much about weaving from me." "If she thinks her work is a match for mine," Arachne boasted, "let her come here and put it to the test." The nymphs and all others who were within earshot shivered when they heard this, for there was no human fault that displeased the gods more than the arrogance of overbearing pride, and mortals who dared to compare themselves with deities always paid a heavy price for their vanity. And so it happened that mighty Athena heard Arachne's bold words, and she was so astonished that she decided to visit this mortal maiden to see what she meant by her boast. Athena disguised herself as an old gray-haired lady, and leaning on her cane as though too feeble to walk erect, she came into the little room where Arachne was spinning. She joined the circle of admirers who watched Arachne spindle with unbelievable speed and dexterity, and she heard the maiden boast again of having skills that were no match even for the gods. "Excuse me, my dear," Athena said at last, laying her hand on Arachne's shoulder. "Listen to the advice of an old woman who has much experience in life. Challenge any mortal you wish, but turn the page. But do not compare yourself with the gods. Ask pardon for the foolish words you have just spoken. Athena is merciful, and I promise that she will forgive your wild boast." Arachne stopped spinning and looked at the old woman in anger. "Keep your foolish advice for your granddaughters and handmaidens," she snarled. "I stand by what I said, and Athena knows full well it's true. Else why is she afraid to come and accept my challenge?" "She has come," cried the old woman, dropping her disguise and revealing her tall, majestic form in all her godlike splendor, including her helmet of the brightest gold. The nymphs and bystanders at once fell upon the ground in fear and reverence, but Arachne, foolish Arachne, held her head high and did not show the least fear or awe. On the contrary, she repeated her boastful challenge to Athena, saying, "In the end you will be asking for my forgiveness, and all shall see who is the teacher, and who is the pupil. Hugh is the pupil. Hugh Jackman." No more words were spoken, nor did they need be. The contest began as the mortal maid and the immortal goddess each took her place in front of an empty loom, working in silence. Both began weaving with great speed, their skillful hands moving swiftly in the excitement of the competition. Athena used wools of many contrasting colors, and her loom began to shimmer like a marvelous rainbow. In the center of her web, she began, In the center of her web she wove the story of her great contest with Poseidon, over which God should be given the city of Athens, and into each of the four corners she wove pictures showing how mortals who had dared to compete with the gods had been punished. These were meant to be the final warning to her rival to give up the contest before it was too late. But Arachne worked at her loom, the color glowing in her cheeks and her breath coming fast with excitement, and such beauty as had never been seen before began to grow at the pictures that appeared under her skillful fingers. You could almost see the birds fly and hear the lapping of the waves in the on the shore, and the clouds seemed to float through woven air. The stories that she pictured were all chosen to show that even the gods could sometimes make mistakes. Disrespectful stories, to be sure, but all woven so miraculously that Athena herself had to stop for a moment to admire the handiwork. The goddess was forced to admit that Arachne had won the contest, but this only increased her wrath at the girl's insolence. When Arachne saw the look of anger in Athena's face, she suddenly realized how foolish and wrong she had been. But it was too late for repentance now. Athena seized the girl's beautiful web and tore it to shreds. Then she touched Arachne with the shuttle 3 times on the head, saying, "Since you are so vain about your weaving, you shall live on a thread and continue to weave forever." In an instant, Arachne began to shrink. Her face disappeared, and her fingers were changed into little black legs, and before long she had been utterly transformed into a spider. And there she stayed, hanging on a thread, forever spinning and weaving. And so have all spiders since been punished for Arachne's pride and her foolish disrespect for the gods. See, in the version I originally heard when I was little, Athena hung Arachne from a tree with her own yarn, and her face swelled up and became the body of the spider, and that's not appropriate for children because it's quite scary. Anyways, what shall we listen to next? Yeah, it's quite dark. Hang on just a sec. This is a good one. Cupid and Psyche. The tragic events that befell the lovely Psyche stem from her persistent curiosity. Encouraged by her jealous sisters, she is not content with the pleasurable life she has been given, and is driven to know for a fact that the one thing she has been told she must accept on faith alone. And is driven to know for a fact the one thing she has been told she must accept on faith alone. Because of this, Psyche is rather like Pandora, a maiden whose curiosity loosed all the evils into the world after they had been imprisoned in a box. You can find this classic myth, blah blah blah. More stories allowed to read to children. Which is it? Oh, that story's not in here. That's sad. Okay. Let's try whispering. Although whispering kind of hurts too. There was a time, long, long ago, that Cupid himself lost his immortal heart to an earthly maiden. And this is how it came to pass. There was a certain king who had 3 lovely daughters. The older 2 married princes of wealth and fame, but the youngest, who was named Psyche, was so radiantly beautiful, so strikingly attractive, that it seemed no man would be worthy of her. She would only be worthy of a woman because she was lesbian. Just kidding. People used to gather in the streets just to see her pass by. They sang hymns in her praise, and some strangers even mistook her for Venus, the goddess of beauty herself. Now, this praise for the beauty of a mortal maiden in time reached the ears of Venus high on Mount Olympus, and it angered the goddess so much that she vowed to punish her earthly rival. One day she called her son, whose name was Cupid. See, this is Roman. This is not Greek. This is Roman. These are the Roman myths. Well, the Roman names anyways. So, let's say Aphrodite and Eros. She called her son, whose name was Eros, and told him to sharpen his arrows for for a very special mission. Cupid, you see, was a more dangerous archer than even mighty Apollo. For although Apollo's arrows could drain one's life in an instant, a wound from Cupid's arrows could cause one to fall deeply in love, and that could mean a lifetime of joy, or also a lifetime of sorrow and grief if that love was not returned or shared. "Avenge your mother," Aphrodite commanded. "Wound this mortal maid, Psyche, and make her fall in love with some poor and unmannered man who will treat her cruelly and be a torment to her throughout all her days." Cupid gathered and readied his weapons, making himself invisible, flew down to earth, and found Psyche asleep in her bedchamber. Cupid carefully touched her heart with the tip of his golden arrow of love, which caused Psyche to awaken suddenly with a start. She opened her beautiful eyes and looked right at Cupid, who forgot momentarily that he was invisible, and was so taken by the incomparable beauty of this mortal maid that he accidentally wounded himself with the same arrow. Oh, that's funny. Ignoring the hurt he had inflicted upon himself, he quickly prepared a healing potion that would undo the effects of the arrow, and poured this soothing vapor over her golden locks. Back to her dream the princess went, unaffected by any thoughts of love. Cupid, now strangely not so light of heart, returned to the heavens, but he did not say a word of the events that had actually taken place that night. Venus waited several days and watched Psyche's every move from high above, but much to her dismay saw no sign whatsoever of Psyche's love for any mortal, rich or poor, so she decided to send down her own spell upon this unsuspecting princess. From that time on, lovely as Psyche was, not a suitor came to ask for her hand. Not a man in the kingdom, born high or low, tried to woo her or win her smile, or attract the slightest response from her. This sudden lack of interest in obtaining Psyche's favor made her parents quite concerned, for they so dearly wanted Psyche to marry a noble prince and live a happy life. Now they wondered if she would ever marry at all, thinking that she had unwittingly given to the gods some affront that had angered them into changing her fate. They took their daughter to the oracle of Apollo, and they asked the oracle to give them advice and counsel. It's the oracle at Delphi, just so you know. I know stuff. The oracle at Delphi was the oracle of Apollo. And I think I need to put my phone down so that I can read this and also eat my food. Let's see. Very bad connection. What the heck? You liar? Let's see. No, that's not gonna work. Frickin' heck. Let's try. There, that works. Okay. That's upside down. Woohoo. Okay. And they asked the oracle to give them advice and counsel. After some time, a voice from deep inside the temple spoke to them. The princess Psyche shall never wed a mortal man. She must be given to him who waits for her on top of yonder mountain. One against whom both gods and men are powerless. Hearing this, her poor parents were distraught, and they gave themselves up to grief as they pictured the fate that was in store for their beloved princess. Surely there must be a hideous monster awaiting her on the mountain, and she must now be delivered unto him. Only Psyche herself reigned undismayed, saying, "We have angered Venus in some way, and now I must atone for what sin? Oh, for that sin, so that you and our kingdom will be allowed to prosper once more. It is the will of the gods, and so we must obey." At last her parents consented, and preparations were made for Psyche to be delivered to and wed to whatever or whoever awaited her on the mountain. The royal maid took her place in the procession that wound its way up the steep slope, and when they reached the very top, they left her there, alone. Full of courage but in secret fear, she watched her people proceed down the mountain path, weeping for her fate, too sad to look back. Only when they were out of sight did she weep, and her tears ran like raindrops down her cheeks. But now a sudden breeze drew near and dried her tears, caressing her hair, seeming to murmur comfort in her. It was Zephyr, the gentle west wind, who had come to befriend her. He lifted her up in his arms, and he carried her up and over the crest of the fateful mountain into a valley below. There he left her, resting on a bank of lush grass, and there she fell asleep. When she awoke, it was near sunset, and she looked about her for some sign of the monster's approach. But she heard and saw nothing unusual. Nothing, that is, until she peered through a clump of nearby bushes and saw, much to her amazement, the most magnificent castle her eyes had ever beheld. Its golden pillars supported a high, arching roof, its walls of purest silver, and walkways inlaid with precious gems reflecting the light of the setting sun. Jeez Christ. There was no lock or chain on the great doorway, and there was no guard to stop her from entering, which she did. And she gazed in awe at the splashing fountains and the marbled archways. A sweet and comforting voice spoke to her, saying, "Do not fear, gentle princess, for all that you see now is yours. Many servants await your every wish. Lie down now and rest. Your bath is being prepared, and a feast will follow." And indeed, for the next several days, Psyche's smallest requests were immediately answered. She was waited upon by unseen spirits and sung to by invisible choirs. Every night she heard the soothing voice of the man to whom she had been given, although she never beheld his form. Only after sunset would he come to her, and his voice, the beautiful voice of a god, would inspire her to trust her strange destiny and to believe in his absolute love for her. Often she begged him to stay with her through the day so that she might see his face, but this he would never grant. "Never doubt me, dearest Psyche," he would say. "Perhaps you would fear me if you saw my form, and your love is all I ask. There is a reason I must remain hidden for now. Trust me and believe." Surely, thought Psyche, this spirit whom the oracle had called her husband was no monster. But what could he be? And why must he remain unseen? These questions haunted the princess as she partook of the pleasures of her new surroundings. And she thought of her dear parents, who were no doubt mourning her loss at the hands of some cruel beast, and she missed the company of her two sisters who were suffering the life of mere mortals while she lived as a goddess. One night she told her husband of these regrets and begged that her sisters at least might come to visit her. He sighed but did not refuse. "Zephyr shall bring them here," said he, and on the following morning, swift as a bird, the west wind came over the crest, the high mountain, and down into the enchanted valley, bearing her two sisters. They greeted Psyche with joy and amazement, hardly knowing how they had come to be where they were. But when she led them through her palace and showed them all her treasures that were hers, envy and bitterness arose in the hearts of the sisters. They asked 1,000 questions, hoping to find some flaw in her good fortune. And when Psyche finally had to confess that she had never seen her husband, they laughed at her steadfast faith, saying, "Have you forgotten what the oracle decreed, that you would be given to a creature that overcomes both gods and men? Are you so deceived by this show of kindness that you are blind to his evil intent? Be warned, dear sister. Your husband is some sort of dragon who feeds you well for the present, so that he may feast upon you some day soon. Trust not his words, but see for yourself. Some night when the monster is asleep, light a lamp and take with you a sharp dagger, so that you can put him to death, and all his riches will be yours and ours." After her sisters had gone, Psyche brooded over what they had said, not seeing their evil intent. Little by little, suspicion ate at her like a moth, until one night, in shame and fear, she hid a lamp and dagger in her bedchamber. Toward midnight, when her husband was fast asleep, up she rose, hardly daring to breathe, and coming softly to his side, she uncovered the lamp in order to see the monster's face. But there before her, in the light of the lamp, the youngest of the gods lay sleeping. It was Cupid himself, the most beautiful, the most irresistible of all the immortals. His hair shone golden in the sun. His face was radiant as springtime, and from his shoulders sprang 2 wings, showing all the colors of the rainbow. Poor Psyche was so overcome with fear and love and guilt. Her hand trembled as she turned to quench her lamp, but as she did so, some of its burning oil fell on the shoulder of Cupid, waking him with a start. He opened his eyes to see his bride and the dark suspicion in her heart. "Oh, doubting Psyche," he said, "is this how you repay my love? After having disobeyed my mother's command and taken you for my wife, I had so hoped that your faith would be constant as my love. But I see that you find your sister's advice preferable to mine, and so I must leave you forever. Love can never dwell where there is suspicion." And so saying, he seized his bow and quiver, unfurled his wings, and flew away out the open window. Psyche tried to follow him and explain to him and apologize for the doubts she had, but she could not fly, so tumbling to the ground in a daze. She could not fly, and so tumbled to the ground in a daze. When her senses returned, she stared about her and saw that she was alone. The palace and gardens had vanished, and the valley was beautiful no longer. From that moment she began to wander day and night throughout many lands, seeking her beloved Cupid and a chance to make amends for her faithlessness. Meanwhile, Cupid lay in his mother's chamber, wounded not only by the burning oil, but more seriously by his own arrow of love, which had pierced his heart when he first beheld the loveliness of Psyche. Venus grew exceedingly angry with her son for having fallen in love with his unworthy mortal maid, but she was still more angry with the maid herself for causing Cupid to be so sick at heart. and Venus would have destroyed poor Psyche on the spot had not great Juno stopped her and declared her judgment that the pair had committed no evil. They had merely fallen in love and were now suffering as lovers do. Hearing this, Venus returned to care for her son, but she harbored still a deep resentment for the Princess Psyche. After wandering long and far without success, Psyche decided to seek the forgiveness of Venus and submit to whatever punishment or penance Venus might demand. She presented herself at the goddess's temple and asked to be allowed to serve in any way she could. As Psyche knelt sobbing at the entrance, the beautiful Venus herself appeared, but wearing a most angry look. "Have you come to see your husband, whom you so cruelly wounded, and whose love you so heartlessly cast aside?" the goddess asked. "Well, we shall see whether through your cleverness and hard work we shall see whether through your cleverness and hard work you can earn the right to take your apology to him." Why does I keep doing that? So saying, she led Psyche to a large storehouse filled with great quantities of wheat, barley, beans, and many other seeds and grains as well, all mixed together into one immense heap. "Separate these grain by grain and seed by seed," Venus commanded, "so that each kind is in a pile of its own, and see to it that you are finished by nightfall." Then Venus departed, and Psyche sank to her knees in tears, knowing that such a task would be impossible even for the mighty Hercules. What Psyche didn't know, however, was that Cupid was watching over her, still as ardently in love with her as ever. From the corner of her eye she began to see a moving black thread that seemed to emerge and crawl from a crevice in the storehouse wall. Bending nearer to investigate, she saw that it was a great army of ants in columns that had come to her aid. The industrious little creatures worked so rapidly and so diligently that even before the last light streaked the evening sky, the grains and seeds were separated and the impossible task was completed. When Venus saw that the storehouse had been completely transformed just as she asked, she knew that Psyche must have had some divine help, and she became even more determined to make the mortal princess suffer for the way she had treated Cupid. On the next morning she ordered Psyche to gather wool from each of the ferocious rams with the golden fleece that had grazed in a nearby grove. Not just some of the golden wool, mind you, but some from each ram, else Psyche must return to her family at once and forever. Well, poor Psyche couldn't even cross the mighty river that bordered the grove, much less did she know how she would overcome the sharp horns and gnashing teeth that awaited her on the other side. And once again she wept in despair. But Cupid persuaded the river god to help her in her quest, and soon she was carried across the treacherous waters and instructed to pick the golden wool not from the rams themselves, but from the bushes and briars that touched the coats of all the rams that they passed by. Once again Venus became enraged when Psyche returned, her arms full of the shining fleece. "I know very well that it is not by your own doing that you succeeded in these tasks," the goddess fumed, "but whoever is aiding you against me will be of no help to you this time. Here, take this box and make your way into the underworld, where you will find Persephone." Wait. Yeah, I'm gonna say Persephone because Proserpine? Proserpine? I don't like that word. It's Persephone because that's Greek, and this is Roman, and I hate it. "And say to her, my mistress Venus asks that you send a little of your beauty to her, for she has lost some of her own in caring for her injured son. Now, Psyche, let's see if your wits are a match for this challenge." Psyche was certain now that her destruction was near, for she knew well that mortals do not venture into Hades and return to earth alive. And so it was in utter despair that she climbed a high cliff and prepared to kill herself by jumping from its edge. But a soothing voice whispered in her ear, "I know your grief, dear Psyche, but listen to me, and you will learn a safe way to make your journey and return." And the gentle voice went on to tell her how one might avoid all the dangers of Hades and come out unscathed. "Just be sure," added the voice, "when Persephone has returned the box to you, do not open it, no matter how you may long to do so." Psyche listened well and followed every step the voice told her, and before long... Hang on. And before long she had made her way safely into Hades and into the palace of its king and queen. She made her errand known to Persephone, who complied with her request, and soon Psyche found herself in the upper world again, wearied but hopeful. "I am so worn with toil," she lamented, "that my appearance will no longer be pleasing to my husband. I have come so close to seeing him again, and now he will think me unattractive. Surely Venus cannot need all this beauty I have brought back in this box, and since it is only to please my beloved husband, it might be right for me to take just a little." So saying, she carefully opened the box. Poor Psyche should have known that the spells and potions of Hades are not for mortal maidens. No sooner that she had inhaled the strange aroma that was emitted that she soon fell down in the middle of the road, without sense or motion, quite overcome with the deepest sleep. Now it happened that Cupid had recovered from his wound, and he could no longer endure the absence of his beloved Psyche. He slipped unnoticed from his chamber and flew to the spot where she lay. He gathered up the potions and spells that had escaped and sealed them again in the box. "Dearest Psyche," he said, "your curiosity has once again led you to near ruin, but the power of my love will save you." He knelt down beside her and kissed her cheek. As if from a dream, Psyche awoke and found herself beautiful once again. "Take the box to my mother as she commanded you," Cupid said, "and I will take care of the rest." He spread his rainbow wings once again, and Psyche watched him rise until he was far out of sight. He continued up and up until he reached the heights of Mount Olympus, where all the gods sat feasting. He begged them to calm his mother's anger and hatred for Psyche. They heard his story, and their hearts were touched. The mighty Jupiter himself lent a favoring ear, and shortly thereafter called Venus to him, and persuaded her to accept Psyche as one of their own. Mercury was dispatched to bring the mortal maid up to Olympus, and there she was offered ambrosia and nectar on which to feast. "Take these," Jupiter said, "and become immortal, nor shall Cupid ever be apart from you again." Psyche consumed all that she was given, and thereby became a goddess. Cupid took her by the hand, and they remained together forever. Oh, that's so sweet. Okay. So, there you have it. And I'm gonna have to go because it's currently 11:18 at night, and I need to go to sleep. Yeah, nothing beats a good love story. Anyways, yeah, thanks for watching and thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe. Just kidding. I mean, you can if you want, but I think you're already subscribed. Anyways, have a good night, you guys, and I will see you in my next video / live stream. And please let me know if you guys liked it, if you want to hear more. I really like Greek myths, so Just let me know if you like it, and I'll see you guys later.